So good to have you join us today. Hello and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Joon in Seoul. Let's first get started with a glimpse of today's highlights. Korea's financial watchdog introduces a three-track corporate restructuring plan to tackle the country's struggling industries. We sit down with an expert to find out more. Raising taxes on cigarettes to discourage people from smoking might have worked for a while, but not anymore, as lighting up in Korea returns to levels seen before the price hike. These stories and more coming right up. As part of efforts to boost Korea's sluggish economy, the government introduces a comprehensive plan to restructure the country's struggling industries, including shipbuilding, shipping, and steel industries. Our Kim Min-ji starts us off.
The Financial Services Commission says it will take a three-tiered approach to restructuring Korea's traditional core industries.
Business conditions are deteriorating structurally for industries such as shipbuilding, shipping and steel, and the situation is not likely to clear up soon. We have been tasked with rooting out companies or industries that are doing poorly or supporting them to ensure they remain competitive.
The first tier will cover industries that are highly sensitive to the current economic conditions. A government consultative body will set the basic direction of the restructuring plan, which will be carried out by the individual firms and their creditors. The second tier will involve restructuring companies based on their estimated credit risk in order to either normalize their business or liquidate their assets in case of insolvency. The third tier involves restructuring companies or industries suffering from oversupply. Here, the companies will draw up their own restructuring plans, possibly involving mergers with other firms or downsizing their facilities, and the government will support them. Amid a prolonged global slowdown of falling oil prices, Korea's shipbuilding giants have been hit hard, with eye-watering losses on the back of cancelled orders and construction delays. Last year, the country's three major shipbuilders posted a combined loss of roughly $7 billion, forcing them to lay off workers. The shipping industry is in a similar situation, with the debt of the sector's biggest player, Hanjin Shipping, estimated at nearly $5 billion. The Financial Services Commission chairman said that for the restructuring plans to be successful, the investors, creditors, and employees must all share the burden. He vowed to expand the assets of state-run banks as well as come up with measures to support workers who have been laid off. Kim Min-ji, Business Daily.
Now, in line with the government's three-tiered restructuring package, the Minister of Trade, Industry and Energy, Joo Hyung-hwan, met with the heads of Korea's top 10 businesses to further outline details on revamping the ailing corporate sector. The minister said for companies facing insolvency, the government will encourage swift restructuring led by the market and existing systems. In terms of industries that face oversupply and an ensuing risk of insolvency, such as steel and shipbuilding, the government has plans to provide analysis on the future outlook for business and help creditors and companies overhaul their operations. He added active support will be offered to firms so they can expand their competitiveness through mergers and acquisitions, and that many companies have already started reforming their operations starting last year. And to tell us more about the government's blueprint on corporate restructuring and how this is expected to help the country's local industries, Professor Yang Joon from the Catholic University of Korea joins us in the studio today. So good to see you, Professor.
Happy to be here.
All right, so the government has taken the lead in carrying out this corporate restructuring process instead of leaving things to creditors and banks. So where does this sense of urgency is coming from?
Okay, well, the leading bank for the restructuring has been the Korean Development Bank, which is a state affiliated bank. And there has been some accusations that because they're state affiliated, their restructuring has gone very slowly, and a lot of that is due to political pressure. Now, for the shipping industry, there is a big realignment on global alliances. So if Korea cannot plug itself into these changing alliances, they'll lose out on the global route networks. So that, I think, really hit the government, the need for quick restructuring.
Now, like we said earlier, the sectors that need the most restructuring seems to be shipping and shipbuilding industries. At this point, we want to know, why are they struggling so much?
Okay, well, there's a short-term reason and a long-term reason. The short-term reason is that global financial crisis really hit the demand, and it still hasn't recovered yet. But the long-term structural reason for the shipping industry is that when things were going well, right before the financial crisis, they rented out a lot of boats instead of buying or building the boats of their own, and they promised to pay such a high rent for them that now they're unprofitable. And then they had the leaders of the company in the early 2000s, the people who were expert at this area, they died and their wives took over. Now, not to say that wives cannot be a good CEO, but I don't think they had enough experience. They needed to listen to a lot of people around them, but they seem to have made a lot of wrong decisions, especially on the part of Hanjin. So that's been another problem. And then for the shipbuilding, they were caught by China. They were getting cheaper. They're catching up on technology. And then some firms have a lot of labor problems. They want higher wages, and the current environment doesn't support it. And then most of these shipbuilding companies decided to go into marine sea oil rig platform building. And apparently they went in without that much of an expertise, without that much of engineering know-how. So the projects have not only been delayed because of lesser demand, but they also cost of them have been higher than they expected. So those factors seem to have caught those two industries specifically.
All right, so a lot of difficulties that they have faced until now. But now the biggest problem, or now as we saw in the report, the government announced this 3-track restructuring plan. Do you think this will actually help those struggling industries?
Somewhat. Now, the problem for the shipping industry is that they're paying too high a rent, and this might help them renegotiate the rent. Though you have to start wondering, why did they wait so long to renegotiate?
Right.
And then secondly, they have very high debt loads. Maybe government will be able to arrange some debt forgiveness or refinancing, and that will probably be a lot of help. But the third problem, what to do with their management, what to do with their inefficiency, I'm not sure how much the government itself can actually help, because obviously government is not in the business of making businesses efficient.
Right.
So they'll probably do a supporting role, but how to make those companies more efficient, that's a problem to be worked out with the financial institutions leading the restructuring and whatever new management that they decide to get.
Now, along with that problem is also, I guess, the biggest problem that follows restructuring is layoffs. And the government has said that it is going to come up with a separate plan to deal with that problem, I guess, for people who are going to lose jobs. So what can we expect from that separate plan that the government is talking about?
Okay, well, the government has a restructuring law that they passed very recently. And within that law, there are some provisions for retraining and assistance in getting new jobs. I had been worried somewhat because it seemed those type of restructuring and assistance seem to be only being open for large companies, but in today's meeting, they said that this will be open to SMEs, small and medium-sized businesses as well. So that, I think, is good news. And then the government has been hinting that perhaps there will be more welfare assistance both from the central government and the regional government, but they haven't exactly signaled how much or what type of aid it's going to take place. So we don't know at this point exactly what the welfare benefits are going to be.
And at this point, we're wondering, how is the government going to secure resources that are needed in order to carry out these reforms? Okay,
well, there have been some worries that because Korea Development Bank is taking the lead on this, do they have enough capital?
Right.
And this morning's meeting, the representatives from the bank said that they do have enough capital to take care of this particular problems, but perhaps if there's some unforeseen problems, they may need more capital. And there is some movement in the National Assembly right now to provide more capital to the Korea Development Bank and other banks who are participating in the restructuring. So we'll get the funds from the government, basically.
All right. Well, there have also been calls from companies and the ruling party to further deregulate, for calls for deregulation if the government is to push ahead with this restructuring plan. What are your thoughts on this?
Okay, well, I think the regulatory reform is essential because, well, part of the problem is that shipping and the shipbuilding needed reforms for quite some time. And in Korea, there's a lot of reasons why we do this, but if you look at the advanced countries, they engage in sort of constant restructuring, constant workout. You hear companies, when their profit falls, you hear them selling off parts of their companies or merging all the time. In Korea, that doesn't seem to happen that regularly. It sort of takes they wait for too long and then it takes a push from the government. Part of the reason, not all of it, but part of the reason is some of the regulatory structure that's within the Korean laws and the legal system, and that should be reformed so that they can engage in sort of constant restructuring. Now, a lot of people are afraid of that. But if you have constant restructuring, then we may not have to have so much massive restructuring.
Right. So taking things a little at a time instead of having a big push all the time. Well, this week, the government will be announcing a comprehensive plan to nurture new industries. So what can we expect out of this announcement?
Okay, well, I'm a bit distrustful of it personally because I'm not convinced that government can come up with, government can target industries or government can come up with the industries of the future. I think a much better alternative is to have the regulatory reform that we talked about earlier, in an environment where any company can be established in any industry and allowed to develop. Sort of like let all the weeds grow and maybe some of them will grow up to be flowers.
Okay.
But having the government pick particular industries, what if it fails? Because the government record is not perfect. So I think it's much better to have a regulatory reform environment where we can let any companies, any entrepreneurs set up any companies rather than government trying to pick which companies will be the companies of the future.
All right, but we'll definitely look forward to what comes out of that announcement this week. Thank you so much for coming in today, Professor.
Thank you.
Korea's growth rate has remained in the 0% range for a second straight quarter. The slowing growth, prompted by sluggish demand at home and abroad, is deepening concerns of low growth becoming a long-term trend. Our Hwang Jae reports.
Growth in Korea's economy has slowed again for another quarter. The Bank of Korea says the country's GDP expanded just 0.4% in the first 3 months of this year from the previous quarter. This marks a slowdown from the 0.7% growth posted a quarter before and is equal to the pace of expansion recorded when the country was hit hard by a MERS outbreak. Dragged down by faltering exports and dull domestic demand, the first quarter growth figure came in low despite aggressive government spending.
The government front-loaded its budget in the first quarter, which pulled up investments in social overhead capital. The government's spending and investments contributed greatly to first quarter growth.
With that, construction investment went up almost 6%, while facilities investment plunged. Exports that have been on a downslide for over a year now dropped 1.7%, and private consumption also dipped. Citing weak first quarter performance figures, Korea's central bank trimmed its latest forecast for growth to below 3%. This has further stoked worries of Korea falling into a low growth trap, a reason why some analysts see more expansionary measures down the road.
The best scenario for the Korean economy this year would be growing at around the same level as last year. But most private institutions don't see that happening. That means the country needs a more aggressive fiscal policy compared to last year's extra budget.
But with the central bank for now saying that the economy will show signs of gradual recovery this quarter, economists say more monitoring should come ahead of a supplementary budget or a key rate cut. And facing skepticism that a rate cut will not be a cure-all for conditions that mostly stem from structural issues, experts say the Bank of Korea will remain cautious about moving the rate that already stands at a record low 1.5%. Hwang Jae, Business Daily.
There were hopes that more people would quit smoking after those cigarette prices went up last year. But cigarette sales actually rebounded this year with nearly 18 billion sold in the first quarter. And now there are criticisms that not only did the government's plan to curb smoking fail, it only boosted profits for tobacco producers. Our Lee Jung has more.
Shortly after cigarette prices nearly doubled to $4 a pack last year due to a hike in taxes, the government's goal to curb smoking seemed to be working, at least for a while. But now, people's smoking habits appear to have returned to similar levels. According to Korea's Yonhap news agency, 17.7 billion cigarettes were sold in the first quarter, jumping roughly 40% from the first 3 months of last year, which is immediately after the tax hike was rolled out in January. Compared to 2 years ago, when a pack was about $2, the number of cigarettes sold stands at nearly 90%. The company that gained the most from this was Korea's leading tobacco company, KT&G. It reported an operating profit of roughly $340 million in the January to March period, selling nearly 50% more on year. Also, with overseas sales recording the highest quarterly achievement, the world's fifth largest tobacco producer has been seeing a continued rise in stock prices for 52 consecutive weeks. Experts say the government's aim to promote public health has not had its desired effect and has only contributed to an increase in tax revenue.
If the government uses goods popular with the general public to collect more taxes, it will not ease income inequality, but instead widen the gap between the rich and the poor.
And the pickup in smoking also looks likely to stay, with security firms raising their projections for growth in demand this year to 15% from 8%. Lee Joo-young, Business Daily.
And that wraps it up for today. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.